"You always got everything," my sister shouted, then flung a deed across dinner. The paper slid over gravy rings and found my lap like judgment. "Daddy never meant it for you," she said, voice hard as gravel. Her knuckles were white against the laminate, shaking with history and spite. I unfolded the deed and saw Soren Whitaker printed like a warning. The kitchen smelled of pipe smoke, onions, and the heat of August. Petra's eyes wouldn't hold mine, darting toward the back door's crooked latch. Outside, cicadas sang like power lines humming before a blackout. My breath came sharp, a cut between ribs that never healed right. "You sold it," I said, and the room narrowed to a single nail. She scoffed and poured coffee she wouldn't drink, hands unsteady. "Taxes were drowning us," she said, words landing like stones in a well. I traced the escrow date, too fast after the funeral's midnight casseroles. A clause number glinted in the corner like a fish under ice. "You met him before the service," I said, tasting metal and memory. Petra's jaw stiffened, and her mug tapped the counter twice, betraying rhythm. She shoved her phone beside the salt, face down like a secret. A bank text flashed anyway, green against cracked glass, winking confirmation. The sycamore windbreak shivered outside, leaves whispering about machines and maps. I folded the deed once, then twice, like folding a flag wrongly. "Don't dramatize," Petra said, shoulders squared in borrowed bravery. "He's building homes for families," she added, as if charity excused theft. My father's pocketknife hung from a nail by the calendar ghost. I stared at the blade and remembered him sharpening it after harvests. "The creek is protected," I said, "because the creek had raised us." Petra's laugh broke, thin as tin, and she stared at her shoes. "Everything's negotiable," she said, "but our father never negotiated water." Through the window, survey spray glowed, neon along the fence stones. The deed rustled like a trapped bird trying to forget the sky. My tongue found a prayer it didn't recognize and swallowed it whole. I opened the drawer where Dad kept maps and thumbed empty wood. The old survey was gone, leaving dust outlines and one bent tack. "Where is it?" I asked, because questions can be hammers or doors. Petra lifted her chin but only found air heavy with frying grease. "Stop digging," she said, but my hands were already in the soil. Soren's name crawled along my skin like ants that refused to die. I pictured bulldozers shouldering the field, ribs of earth snapping loudly. The stovetop clicked as a pilot light searched for faith and failed. "You could have told me," I said, voice soft as a wet match. She looked away, and something ancestral inside me set its feet. The next morning, the kitchen felt like a crime scene pretending to be ordinary. Petra's mug was gone, but a faint lipstick print haunted the rim. I found the deed folded near the trash, smudged by coffee and guilt. I stared at the buyer's signature, Soren Whitaker, and the ache behind my ribs sharpened. The fields outside looked the same, but something irreversible had been signed beneath them. I dialed the title office, voice trembling, asking for confirmation. The woman paused, her tone clipped. "I'm sorry, ma'am, that's confidential between client and buyer." My blood chilled. I was her sister, yet locked out like a stranger. I checked the clock, barely 9, and already the truth was retreating behind procedure. "I'll find out myself," I whispered, though no one was there to hear. By noon, I drove past the windbreak, and red paint slashed across bark like open wounds. The sycamores had been there since before I could walk, roots tangled with my father's sweat and stories. Now they were numbered 1 through 12, waiting for chainsaws and bulldozers. A small plastic flag fluttered near the creek bed, tagged Drainage Phase 1. My throat closed around that phrase, the language of erasure dressed as progress. I pulled over, stepping into the dust, and felt the earth pulse under my boots. It remembered more than paper ever could. A faint shine in the soil caught my eye, metal dull from time. I knelt, dug with shaking hands, and pulled up my father's pocket knife, its handle worn smooth. Beneath it, a folded index card with 2 words, "Easement Water." My heart thudded like thunder trapped behind ribs. I pressed the card to my chest, the handwriting unmistakable Dad's. That meant he hid it here deliberately, a message buried beneath silence. I drove home fast, the truck engine coughing, windows open to the scent of dry weeds. Petra's car wasn't in the driveway, and that absence screamed louder than any confrontation. Inside, the house buzzed with emptiness. Every clock ticked out of sync. I laid the card on the table beside the deed. A war between ink and intention. Petra's story about taxes collapsed under the weight of those 2 words. Easement water. It meant ownership. It meant restriction. It meant she'd sold something she couldn't. My stomach turned with betrayal layered over grief. I poured a glass of tap water and stared at it, wondering if it still flowed from our spring. The sound of it filling the glass felt like a memory crying quietly. I remembered us as kids, racing to the creek with jars to catch minnows, Dad laughing behind. "This land listens," he'd said once. "You care for it, it'll care for you." I wiped my face and looked around the kitchen. Every photo, every plate turned familiar into foreign. My phone buzzed again. "Petra," one word. "Stop." I didn't. I opened her contact, stared at the photo of us smiling, and deleted it. Some things rot faster when kept too long. "I have to know the truth," I whispered, steady this time, a vow born from dust and inheritance. I began with the county website, a maze of tabs and polite walls. The planning portal loaded slow, spinning like a rattler coiling in shade. Under active permits, Whitaker Infill Partners glittered with cheerful marketing language. I clicked details and found a grading permit stamped before Petra's sale date. My stomach lifted, then sank, like a truck hitting two quick ruts. I screenshotted everything and emailed myself twice, afraid of vanishing pages. The clerk's number sat under contact, so I dialed and tried sounding harmless. "Just clarifying dates," I said, keeping breath steady while my hands trembled. "Public record shows what you see," she answered, voice neutral as uncut lumber. I heard printers in the background, chewing paper like quiet, hungry animals. The feed store smelled like molasses, rust, and gossip trying to behave. I pretended to browse twine while men weighed wheat seed on creaking scales. A rancher muttered, "Soren's boys were out here before the funeral." My heart snagged, but I faced the horse vitamins and kept listening carefully. Petra's purse sat open on the truck seat when I returned home. A folded slip peeked from the pocket like a shy, guilty tongue. I slid it free and saw property tax prepayment stamped and dated afterward. My breath tightened. That meant money moved despite her talk about drowning taxes. I put it back exactly, edges aligned, pretending I hadn't seen anything. The sky felt lower, like weather kneeling over the roof with purpose. At the library, fluorescent lights softened the dust into floating, patient snow. Miss Crenshaw, the librarian, still wore cat pins and counted change softly. "Do you still have the large format scanner log from yesterday?" I asked. She tilted her head, then pulled a spiral ledger from beneath the desk. "Someone scanned a parcel survey oversized," she said, tapping a fresh entry line. The initials read S.W., written fast, ink still a little blue wet. I felt a heat crawl my neck like a warning remembered too late. "Did they copy twice?" I asked, voice trying not to sound desperate. She nodded once and pointed toward the public computers humming by history. I printed the log and thanked her, words brittle against my tongue. On my way out, I paused by the bulletin where children colored creeks. Their crayons bled bright water, skipping rocks in loops that never broke. A memory uncoiled. Dad walking boundaries with us, stones pocketed like prayer beads. He showed how fence lines follow Earth's ribs, not just a surveyor's guess. "Paper lies," he'd said, laughing gently, "but ground remembers and corrects." He placed my hand on a corner stone, warm from July bearable heat. "You feel it?" he asked, and I felt it settle under skin. He poured creek water into jars, labeled years, lined them above the sink. Every jar a calendar of clarity, silt, drought, and returning courage. In the present, my throat burned. Remembering jars we never saw again. Back outside, the afternoon stretched thin, an overused rubber band about to snap. Trucks downshifted on the highway, a low hum crawling through our siding. I laid the clues on my passenger seat like evidence needing oxygen. Permit dates wrong, tax slip after wire, survey scanned by SW yesterday. Each piece clicked louder than Petra's tap-tap mug on brittle laminate. "Why hurry permits before death?" I asked the windshield, feeling foolish, relentless, certain. A crow hopped along a streetlight, head cocked as if keeping minutes. I listed next steps aloud, giving fear a shape I could challenge. Find backup maps, talk neighbors, check recorder's microfilm, photograph every marked tree. The crow flapped away, and the air smelled like rain that wouldn't arrive. The rumors came quiet first, then louder, like boots over gravel after rain. At the diner, Mrs. Lowell leaned too close when she poured my coffee. Petra was seen at Whitaker's office. "Before the funeral," she whispered, pretending sugar was urgent. I stirred once, twice, and let the silence bite. When I stepped outside, the air smelled like burnt toast and secrets. By the feedlot, my truck tires sagged. 2 were cut clean through. A folded note fluttered under the wiper. Let it go, letters jagged, fast. I laughed once, ugly, too loud for morning. Fear twisted in my gut but changed shape mid-turn. Fear was energy, miswired, rewired. I picked up the note and crumpled it small enough to swallow. The wind carried dust that tasted like the start of a plan. I locked every door that night, then unlocked my mind. On the kitchen table lay my stack of clues, fragile as moth wings. Permit before sale, tax slip after, scanned survey, missing map. They think I'll scare easy, I said to the quiet. To Dad's ghost, maybe? The faucet dripped like a slow metronome for rage. I took my notebook and began listing names in black pen: Petra, Soren, title officer, county planner, neighbor Tate who watches everything. I circled creek easement water 3 times until the ink bled through. The sound of the pen scratching steadied my pulse. I realized this wasn't just about property, it was about memory, inheritance, identity. People like Soren built over stories they didn't understand. People like me learned to dig where it hurt. Sleep refused to visit, so I drove to the field at dawn. The sycamores glowed silver blue, ghosts preparing for another day alive. I walked to the creek, where fog curled low and kind. The water moved slow, unbothered, carrying leaves like small confessions. I crouched, dipping my fingers into the current, feeling temperature shift with depth. "You're still ours," I whispered, childish, stubborn, true. My reflection rippled, then steadied. Dad's words echoed. The ground remembers. The sun climbed higher, gold light spilling across fence stones like revelation. By the time it hit my face, my fear was drying into resolve. I stood, brushing dirt from my knees, and decided to stop mourning and start acting. Back in town, I bought a disposable camera from the drugstore rack. The clerk asked if I wanted a loyalty card. I said no and smiled too wide. At the field, I photographed every spray mark, every flag, every shift in the creek's curve. Each click felt like reclaiming a heartbeat. Then I drove past the county recorder's office, counting cars, noting schedules. Jonah Patel's law office sat across the street, sign faded but steady. I remember Dad saying, "That Patel boy knows water better than anyone." The seed of an idea rooted itself fast. I didn't need a fight. I needed proof, patience, and witnesses. Revenge wasn't about fire, it was about erosion, slow and certain. That night, I taped the easement water card above my bed like scripture. Outside, thunder rolled far away, pretending disinterest. Petra's number flashed on my phone again, then disappeared unanswered. I lay still, listening to rain tap the roof in cautious rhythm. "Tomorrow," I whispered. "Tomorrow I start counting differently." The fear hadn't vanished. It had evolved, grown muscle and direction. In the dark, I could almost feel the creek breathing under the house, steady as purpose. And somewhere between thunder and dawn, I decided, they might own the paper, but I'll make the ground testify. Jonah Patel looked older than I remembered, but his eyes still held that lawyer's precision like measuring tapes behind glass. His office smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and rain, the scent of patient wars. "You're your father's daughter," he said, glancing at the stack I placed on his desk. "But this is messy." I nodded, pushing the deed, the tax slip, and my photos toward him. "Messy's what they count on," I replied, voice steadier than it felt. He read silently for a long minute, tapping his pen once, twice, 3 times. "Whitaker's smart," he said finally. "Files fast, sells faster. But your sister couldn't have conveyed the water rights." The word "couldn't" landed soft, then bloomed like fire. I leaned forward, the air thick with wet paper and awakening courage. Jonah turned his computer screen toward me, showing the property records index. "See this line? There was a conservation rider in '99, part of a state stream protection grant. I'd bet there's a dormant clause somewhere that limits development near that creek." He scrolled, muttering statute codes like incantations. I recognized my father's name 3 times across pages, once beside reversion option. "What does that mean?" I asked, afraid to breathe too loud. "It means," Jonah said, leaning back, "if the creek buffer's violated, ownership could revert to a land trust automatically." The words lit up every corner of my thoughts. My father had planned for this, long before we knew what betrayal looked like. Petra hadn't just sold land, she'd tried to sell a lie that couldn't survive inspection. He offered me coffee, and I took it. black and scorching. "We'll need proof," Jonah continued, "not just memory. Physical evidence of the stream, conservation documents, anything showing knowledge of encumbrance before sale." I nodded, already planning routes, places to dig, people to ask. "I'll start at the library again," I said, "and maybe talk to Mr. Tate down by the mill. He remembers everything." Jonah smiled faintly, that kind of half-grin people wear when they want to believe in hope but have seen its cost. "Be careful," he said, handing me a yellow notepad. "People like Whitaker don't lose gracefully." His tone wasn't fear, it was respect disguised as warning. I slipped the notepad into my jacket, the paper warm from his hand. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the air rinsed and sharp. I drove past the creek again, tires kicking, gravel into the quiet. The sycamores stood like guards, defiant despite the fluorescent survey marks. I parked, stepping into mud that pulled slightly at my boots, like the earth trying to hold me still. I took photos again, closer this time, bark patterns, roots, and the orange ribbons tied around them. The wind shifted, carrying the distant hum of machinery from Soren's site. I whispered my father's name like a promise and headed back toward town, notebook ready for the next battle. At the recorder's office, fluorescent light hummed above stacks of unlabeled boxes. The clerk frowned when I asked for conservation filings from '99. "Most of those are archived," she said, rolling her chair to a metal cabinet. The drawer screeched open, dust swirling like a released secret. "You'll want to check the environmental grant section, page 52. I thanked her and started flipping. And then, between yellowing sheets, I found it my father's signature again, beside the word buffer. A small, faded stamp at the corner read, "Active reversion. Valid." My hands trembled as I copied the reference number. The paper smelled faintly of soil and rain, as if it had been waiting for me all these years. By the time I left, dusk had folded itself over town, edges soft and blue. I stopped by the diner, ordered soup I didn't eat, and scribbled everything in my notebook. Each detail lined up, like fence posts in fresh mud, straight, deliberate, unbreakable. The waitress asked if I wanted it to go, and I smiled. "No," I said, "I'm not running anywhere." On the drive home, the radio hissed static, but it sounded almost like applause. Jonah had given me a weapon disguised as paperwork, and I intended to aim true. I didn't know where this road ended, but I knew who it would pass through first. The courthouse smelled of wax and faint mildew, that scent of history trying not to rot. Jonah met me by the elevator, holding 2 manila folders, thick with promise. "We found something," he said quietly, and the words caught my lungs mid-breath. In his office, the light fell warm through half-drawn blinds, slicing gold across the desk. He opened the folder and slid out a photocopy. "Conservation Rider, Stream Restoration Grant, 1,999. My father's name inked in perfect cursive, the old county seal stamped beside it. "See here," Jonah said, tapping a paragraph. "Any sale that compromises water quality or riparian buffer triggers reversion to the land trust." He looked up at me. "That means Soren's company could lose everything they just bought." My heart stumbled, then sprinted. The air buzzed, like the moment before lightning hits metal. Jonah wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, handing me an email printout he'd pulled from public records. It was a communication between Soren's project manager and a consultant subject line, "Potential encumbrance." They discussed how to accelerate, closing before county data refresh. My skin prickled with that kind of anger too cold to name. "They knew," I said softly. Jonah nodded, eyes tired but alive. "They knew about the restriction." "That's fraud." The word hung heavy, beautiful, dangerous. He leaned back in his chair. "But we'll need corroboration. Something to prove Petra or Soren acted knowingly." My throat tightened. The thought of my sister tied to deceit burned like salt. "Petra's smarter than she pretends," I whispered, half defending, half accusing. Jonah watched me carefully but didn't push. "Then we'll find her footprints, not her confession." I left the office just before dark, the folder tucked beneath my arm like a lifeline. The courthouse steps gleamed with rain, each puddle reflecting streetlights like tiny truths. Across the street, the newspaper office glowed faintly, headline boards leaning tired against brick. I wondered if they'd print this story when it broke or bury it next to weather reports. The night felt colder than usual, thin wind slicing through my jacket as if testing resolve. I thought of Petra's note, "Let it go," and smiled without warmth. Every threat, every lie was just evidence rearranged for someone else's comfort. I drove home slow, headlights sweeping through fog like memory searching for a face. At home, the house seemed smaller, walls whispering the past too loudly. I spread the documents across the table, the same place Petra had flung betrayal days ago. The paper edges caught light, turning pale gold, like hope in disguise. "Dad," I said softly, "you hid the truth in plain sight." His handwriting curled steady, the ink never fading, stronger than any contract. The sound of the creek carried faint through the open window, steady, deliberate, free. I thought about Petra again, her nervous tapping fingers, her eyes that darted too quick. Maybe guilt was eating her already. Maybe greed had just left the table. Either way, silence wouldn't save her now. I typed up my notes, scanned every document, and backed them onto 2 drives, one hidden in the freezer, one mailed to myself unopened. Jonah called later, his voice calm but heavy. "Good work today," he said. "But brace yourself, Lila. Proof changes people before it changes outcomes." I looked out the window, watching headlights trace the distant ridge. "I'm ready," I told him. Though readiness felt like a borrowed coat, still stiff but necessary. After we hung up, I stood there a long time, listening to the night stretch its quiet wings. I was shaken, yes, but something deeper had settled beneath the fear. Not peace exactly, just purpose, steady and growing, like water finding its way home. By Friday morning, the wind carried sawdust from the ridge where Soren's men were cutting. It smelled like violence disguised as progress. I parked by the old gate, boots crunching over tire ruts newly carved through our pasture. The noise of machines echoed like thunder rehearsing its next storm. When I reached the creek, orange flags laced the banks like warning veins. The water ran cloudy, brown with trespass. My chest tightened as if the land itself were gasping. Jonah called right then, his voice sharp, breathless with discovery. "Lila, I found the missing affidavit, your father's notarized document." He paused, the paper's rustle coming through the line like heartbeat static. He reserved subsurface water access, the spring box feeding half the town hydrants. Petra's deed tries to transfer what she couldn't sell. I pressed a hand to my throat. "She sold the water," I whispered, not believing my own words. "She sold the town's pulse." I drove straight to Jonah's office, heart drumming a war rhythm. He laid the affidavit in front of me, the ink-dark edges frayed with age. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a line beneath my father's signature. "Easement applies in. Perpetuity, non-transferable under private conveyance." My fingers trembled as they traced the phrase, as if touching my father's hand through time. "She knew," I said, half plea, half statement. Jonah exhaled through his nose, the kind of sigh that admits sorrow without surrender. "Maybe," he said, "but we'll need more." He pulled another page, this one newer, a voicemail transcript recovered from Petra's old phone records. The title read, "From Petra Moreno to Soren Whitaker, March 15. The words crawled under my skin before I even finished reading. "Just make it quick. I want everything liquid before probate questions." The room spun, the air thinning around me until even gravity felt conditional. "She sold it for money before Dad was in the ground," I said, voice brittle. Jonah didn't answer. He didn't need to. The proof sat there between us, undeniable and merciless. Outside, thunder cracked, though the sky was still clear. It sounded like the world, applauding a tragedy. I looked at Jonah, vision blurry at the edges. "How much?" I asked. He hesitated, then opened one more folder. The wire transfer receipt blinked its numbers in black ink, 6 digits long, obscene, and final. "She sold Legacy for half a developer's kitchen remodel," I said, laughing once, sharp and wrong. Jonah reached for the folder, but I held it tight. I wanted to feel the weight of her betrayal in my hands. I left without saying goodbye, the paper still clutched like a wound refusing to clot. The sky opened as I reached the truck, rain slamming hard enough to sting. I drove toward the ridge, wipers losing the fight against the storm. The bulldozers had stopped, men sheltering beneath tarps, their voices swallowed by wind. I stood in the downpour, soaked to the bone, watching muddy water rush through the creek bed, carrying flakes of sawdust and guilt. Each drop felt like judgment from the earth itself. My father's spring box, the same one we used, to clean our hands after chores, now leaked through split ground. I knelt, digging fingers into the soaked soil, whispering his name until the rain carried it away. When I finally rose, headlights cut through the storm from behind Petra's car. She stepped out, umbrella trembling, hair plastered to her face. For a second, she looked younger, scared, almost reachable. "You shouldn't be here," she shouted, her voice nearly drowned by the wind. "Neither should they," I said, pointing toward the churned mud and broken roots. She took a step closer, eyes glassy with rain and something darker. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, voice cracking on. "Mean." I stared at her, trying to find the sister I grew up beside, the one who used to braid my hair and whisper jokes during storms. But all I saw was the woman who sold bloodline for convenience. "You meant every dollar," I said, and turned away before my voice could break. Back in my truck, I sat, trembling, rain drumming on the roof like a verdict. The creek roared beside me, swollen and furious, as if reclaiming what paper had tried to steal. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and whispered, "It's done." But it wasn't. The revelation hadn't finished collapsing, it had only begun. I didn't sleep that night. The rain slowed to a whisper, but the storm inside me refused rest. I kept the affidavit open on the kitchen table, watching the ink blur where tears hit. Around 3 a.m, Petra's car lights flashed through the window. She didn't knock, just stood in the doorway, hair damp, eyes hollow. "Please," she said, voice shaking, "let me explain before you destroy me." I laughed quietly, a brittle sound that didn't belong to me. "Destroy you?" I asked. "You already bulldozed everything that had our name on it." She stepped forward, clutching her purse like a confession. "It wasn't like that," she said. "Soren promised it was temporary, a transfer to cover a loan." The word loan hung in the air, sour and unfinished. "What loan?" I asked, my voice low, dangerous in its calm. Petra hesitated, then opened the purse and spilled papers across the table. Among lipstick tubes and receipts lay a letterhead I didn't recognize, Colden Finance Group. My stomach dropped. "They're private lenders," she said. "I owed them. I lost too much in the casino last year. Dad's medical bills, the funeral, it was all too much. Soren said he could make it go away." She covered her face with both hands. "I just needed time." The edges of her voice tore on that last word. I stared at the papers, at interest rates that looked more like threats, at signatures written in panic. "So you traded the land," I said, "for a lie and a promise." She nodded, sobbing, mascara bleeding into streaks that looked like guilt made visible. I wanted to scream, but grief hollowed the anger before it. I reached air. I pulled the loan documents closer, noticing a name scribbled on the margin, Marcus Whitaker, Soren's cousin. I muttered. Petra froze, eyes widening with new terror. "You knew?" I asked, but I already saw the answer flicker in her silence. "He said it was just business," she whispered. "He said Soren would buy it back in a few months and we'd split the profit." My laugh came bitter, half disbelief, half mourning. "You thought you could flip our father's grave for a payout?" The air in the room thickened, heavy with cigarette smoke and regret. Petra slumped into a chair, trembling. "I didn't think," she said. "I just needed out." Her honesty was a blade, sharp, late, almost kind. For a moment I saw the girl she used to be, the one who'd cried when we buried our dog, the one who'd taken blame when I broke the greenhouse window. But memory is mercy, and I had no more to spare. "They used you," I said, my voice steady now. "But that doesn't make it less betrayal." She nodded, tears dripping onto her sleeve. "I know," she said softly. "Tell me what to do." I gathered the documents, stacked them like ammunition. "You'll help me bring them down," I said. "All of them. Soren, Marcus, the company, anyone who signed a lie." She looked up, uncertain, but there was a flicker, maybe guilt, trying to grow into courage. "You really think we can?" she asked. I met her eyes for the first time that night. "We don't think," I said. "We do." Outside, dawn broke dull and gray, light seeping through the blinds like cautious forgiveness. The creek's sound drifted faint but steady, cleansing in its persistence. I turned the affidavit over, reading my father's last handwritten note on the back. "If water runs true, truth will follow." I closed my eyes and whispered to him, "Then let it run." Behind me, Petra wept quietly, maybe for the first time for something real. And as I folded the documents back into their envelope, I felt the twist settle into shape. This wasn't just my sister's betrayal anymore. It was a network of greed, a family debt stitched to corporate hunger. The collapse wasn't an ending. It was the map to a much larger war. The world felt quieter after the storm, as if the land itself was holding its breath. I woke early, before light, and sat by the window with coffee cooling between my palms. Petra's footsteps creaked upstairs. She hadn't left after the confession. For the first time in years, her presence didn't feel like intrusion, just the echo of unfinished family. I turned to the stack of evidence on the table: the affidavit, the conservation rider, the voicemail transcript, and her debt papers. Each sheet was a puzzle piece, jagged but powerful. Jonah's words replayed in my head: proof changes people before it changes outcomes. I realized I was changing already less victim, more architect. The anger still lived inside me, but it had quieted into something sharper, disciplined, almost serene. Revenge wasn't fire anymore. It was precision. By noon, Petra joined me, her face pale, eyes red but focused. "What now?" she asked. I handed her coffee and slid the papers across the table. "Now," I said, "we build something that won't burn down." We drove to the creek together, silence thick but bearable. The air smelled of wet leaves and diesel ghosts. Survey tape still clung to the trees, but some had fallen, tangled in roots. I crouched near the spring, dipping a test strip into the water. The color shifted, faint traces of sediment from upstream. "He's already disturbed the runoff," I said. "That's a violation." Petra watched me, confusion softening into recognition. "You're documenting it?" I nodded. "Every violation, every change. He built his empire on paperwork. I'll end it the same way." Back at the house, Jonah arrived with his worn briefcase and a look that meant progress. "We can build a case," he said, flipping open his notes. "Fraudulent conveyance, environmental breach, interference with municipal water source. But timing's everything." He pointed at the conservation rider. "If we trigger the reversion clause before final grading, ownership shifts automatically to the trust. The county can't undo it." Petra frowned. "You mean they lose it overnight?" Jonah nodded. "Exactly. But we'll need documentation of current damage, recorded and verified." I smiled for the first time in days. "I can do that," I said. "I've already started." Jonah looked at me curiously, as though seeing a soldier form from the dust. "Good," he said quietly. "Stay invisible until the hearing, then let them see everything." That night, I sat by the creek with a borrowed camera, the lens catching dusk's bruised light. I filmed the erosion lines, the oil sheen on pooled water, the trembling reflection of a sycamore half-marked for death. Frogs sang somewhere behind me, defiant in the chaos. I whispered into the recorder, noting times, dates, wind direction. The small red light blinked steady, the same rhythm as my pulse. I wasn't just documenting, I was reclaiming language. Each frame said, "You can't erase what remembers itself." Petra stood back near the truck, arms wrapped tight, silent witness to consequence. When I was done, I scooped a handful of creek water into a jar and sealed it. "Evidence," I said, and she nodded. The next morning, calm settled over me like armor. I uploaded the footage, printed stills, and logged every image in duplicate folders. I drafted a summary for Jonah, each violation labeled, time-stamped, cross-referenced. Then I walked outside and sat on the porch, watching the sunlight spill through what was left of our trees. There was peace in purpose, a dangerous kind that steadied the hand. Petra came out carrying 2 mugs. "I used to think Dad's work was boring," she said quietly. "All that talk about water tables and soil." I smiled faintly. "Boring keeps you alive," I said. "Excitement's what kills families." She looked at me, guilt and gratitude colliding in her eyes. "I'll testify," she said. I didn't thank her. I just nodded. Some debts don't need words, only endurance. As the day faded, I watched fog roll over the field, slow and sure. I realized this was what strategic calm felt like, not forgiveness, but control reborn. I'd been running on pain, but now I was walking on purpose. Soren thought he'd buried us under contracts and clauses, but he'd never met women raised by rivers. Our father taught us that water bends but never breaks. I held that truth like scripture and whispered to the horizon, "Tomorrow, we rise clean." And the land, listening as it always had, seemed to answer with a soft exhale through the sycamores, steady, ancient, unafraid. I sketched the plan on a paper plate, lines trembling with intent. I numbered steps like a mason marking stones for a foundation. We would not rely only on courtrooms, nor only on angry headlines. First, we needed incontrovertible, time-stamped environmental proof, impossible to dispute. Second, we would force public action by turning local sentiment into legal leverage. Third, we'd engineer a moment where Soren's words and the cameras met. Jonah called it a courtroom bait, but I called it honest theater. Petra would stand beside me, truthful and terrified, lending human weight. The trust officer would be the pivot, ready to accept automatic reversion. Everything hinged on choreography, timing, and the town's stubborn memory. We recruited Miss Alvarez's high school ecology class as citizen witnesses. Their lab reports would be sworn affidavits, dated in school ledger ink. Teachers respect science protocols. Those protocols scare off corporate spin. I arranged volunteer water samplings during peak. Disturbance. Jars labeled and sealed. We planned a rural screening night at the community hall, invitations public. The screening would show our footage with overlays proving permit violations precisely. We'd live stream the screening, time-stamping everything for the county recorder's feed. Jonah drafted emergency motions timed to the live reveal and public uproar. The county planner would be asked to explain permit changes on camera. Public pressure and legal motion would move faster than corporate lawyers prefer. Next, we created a legal snare disguised as community ritual and repair. Petra agreed to publicly confess her debt entanglement and detail the transfer. Her admission would humanize betrayal and cut through potential sympathy for Soren. I insisted she practice her short lines until the tremor sounded honest. Jonah subpoenaed Soren and the title company to appear at the hearing. He also arranged for a trust officer to be present with reversion paperwork. The trust's acceptance clause would trigger automatically upon confirmed buffer violation. We coordinated with the local paper to run a front-page exposé the next morning. That same morning, county inspectors would be physically present to document violations. Timing these events together would collapse Soren's thin options into chaos. We also planned a technological sting to catch evasions and backdoors. Small wearable recorders would be hidden in my jacket and Petra's purse. Jonah would secure legal clearance for these recordings as evidentiary tools. We set decoy meetings with a faux development consultant persona to bait Soren. A prearranged informal chat at the feed store would seek his complacent admission. Cameras at the hall would capture any attempt to bribe or adjourn proceedings. We'd publish transcripts and audio to the recorder and social platforms simultaneously. Digital timestamps plus physical affidavits would form a redundancy lawyers respect. We built redundancies because predators love a single point of failure. Our network would be the net that caught them when they thought they'd flown. Symbolic action completed the strategy. Symbolism moves hearts faster than law. We planted native willows and labeled them with donor plaques during the screening. Each plaque read, "Protected by community memory and the Moreno family." Neighbors would sign a stewardship petition, a public record of intention and care. The petition would be filed with the county that afternoon, raising political stakes. Local radio callers would be invited to speak, amplifying genuine community anger. We arranged for the school choir to sing a line about water and roots. Soren's PR strategy would collapse under the combined weight of civic ritual. People protect what they name aloud. We made naming unavoidable and public. The symbolic reclamation would make legal reversion feel inevitable and righteous. Finally, we closed the circle with procedural precision and moral pressure. Jonah would file the emergency motion the instant the film showed sediment footage. County inspectors would issue a stop work if runoff breached defined buffer thresholds. The trust officer would present reversion paperwork for immediate acceptance on record. Soren would have minutes, not weeks, to scramble legal countermoves with dignity. If he tried to stall, public cameras and the live stream would expose delay tactics. If he offered buybacks, Petra's sworn statement would make such deals legally suspect. We planned to ask for restitution earmarked for stream restoration and community gardens. Victory would be restitution and protection, not ruin for ruin's sake. That was my promise, reclaim the land's future while leaving room for repair. Petra folded into the plan like a broken stitch, finding seam and strength. She practiced truth-telling until her voice was steady as braided rope. Jonah coordinated subpoenas, trust, presence, and inspector timing with surgical care. Miss Alvarez's class prepared sworn lab notes with teachers notarizing each page. Neighbors pledged to attend the screening and sign petitions with visible pens. I organized transportation for elders who remembered our creek from before cars. Every step drilled toward a single moment when truth would meet procedure. We would not ambush for spectacle. We would present incontrovertible, interlocking evidence. I felt the plan settle in my bones, like a well-built bridge. When morning came, I would step onto that bridge and refuse to look back. I spent the morning laying wires between silence and spectacle. The plan had grown roots, now it needed fruit. The hearing would be 3 days away, the county hall already reserved for Soren's presentation. Jonah and I agreed. We'd turn his own stage into our courtroom. That morning, I met with Miss Alvarez's students by the creek. The air shimmered with late heat, dragonflies, slicing sunlight into ribbons. Document everything, I told them, showing how to mark coordinates and label jars. Their laughter mixed with concentration. They didn't know it yet, but they were witnesses to something historic. Petra hovered nearby, pale under her cap, clipboard trembling as she signed her sworn statement. The kids called her Miss Moreno, and she smiled faintly, trying to remember how that felt before shame attached to her name. Jonah spent the day orchestrating subpoenas and timing motions, calling between courthouses like a conductor of controlled chaos. He asked if I'd slept. I lied and said yes. Make sure your evidence chain stays unbroken, he reminded. Defense attorneys love a loose thread. I built redundancies into every folder, mirrored backups on 2 encrypted drives, and mailed one to his office for safekeeping. By afternoon, I drove to the field again. Machinery stood silent, engines sleeping under tarps. I photographed every blade, every track, every fuel drum. The scent of diesel and pine needles burned my throat. At sunset, Petra joined me, clutching her confession draft. I'll read it, she said quietly. At the hearing, I nodded. Not for me, I said. For Dad, and the creek. She looked down, whispering. He'd have hated me. He'd have expected you to fix it, I said. That night, I turned the living room into a command post. 2 laptops, 3 drives, piles of maps, printed timestamps, color-coded binders. The hum of electronics filled the silence like a steady heart. I drafted the video montage footage of the creek, the sediment bloom, the red flags flapping like wounds. Over it, I layered Dad's old voice from a home video. You take care of the water, it'll take care of you. The words cracked in the recording, aged and raw, exactly how truth sounds when it's earned. I synced the clips to align with permit timestamps and violation overlays. Jonah's motion would file the second the footage streamed. Everything was precision now, no emotion, just execution. Yet beneath the calm, my pulse kept whispering one word: ready. The next morning, I met with the trust officer, a woman named Renee Ellis, calm as a clockmaker. Her eyes were gray, not unkind but exact. If the reversion clause activates, title reverts instantly, she explained, signing her portion of the paperwork. We'll hold stewardship until municipal oversight confirms compliance. And the land stays protected, I said. She nodded once. Until the water runs dry or the law forgets itself. I liked her immediately. She'd seen this before, greed wearing progress like perfume. Before she left, she handed me her business card. Be brave, she said. Most people stop halfway through justice. I slipped the card into my notebook next to Dad's words. The ground remembers. By evening, I walked the creek one last time before the storm I'd invited. The sycamores bent slightly, their leaves whispering like witnesses rehearsing lines. I carried the jar of murky water from earlier, held it up to the fading sun. Inside, the silt swirled, a miniature universe of consequence. I felt oddly calm. Every betrayal, every debt, every sleepless night had distilled into this stillness. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about restoring balance. I tucked the jar into my bag, zipped it shut, and turned toward home. Tomorrow, the cameras would roll, and truth would no longer whisper through trees. It would speak loud enough to make the earth stop and listen. The county hall buzzed like a hive the evening of the hearing. Folding chairs lined every wall, the air thick with perfume, sweat, and curiosity. I stood near the back, pretending calm, the weight of a camera battery pressing against my ribs. Petra sat 2 rows ahead, shoulders squared, her confession tucked into her purse. Jonah paced near the front, legal pad in hand, checking time against his watch. We go live in 2 minutes, he murmured when he passed by me. I nodded, feeling the old floorboards shift beneath my boots. Outside, the hum of diesel engines idled like predators waiting for signal. Soren Whitaker stood near the podium, shaking hands, his smile sharp and rehearsed. He wore a charcoal suit, clean and expensive, like gilt ironed flat. The county chair called the meeting to order, the microphone popping once like a warning shot. We're here to review the Whitaker Creekside Development Proposal, she announced, eyes scanning the crowd. Soren stepped forward, notes in hand, and began his speech with that smug rhythm of men who believe consequence is optional. "We're not here to take from the community," he said, voice smooth as oil, "but to build homes for working families." Applause fluttered from 2 rows of developers' assistants. I pressed the camera button, the red light flickering alive. Behind me, the projector. Operator Miss Alvarez's student signaled readiness with a subtle nod. Jonah caught my eye and mouthed, "Now." I pressed play. The first frame hit the wall, a drone shot of the creek before bulldozers, lush and whole. The next, a comparison. Churned mud, flagged stumps, runoff pooling like veins opened too deep. Gasps rippled through the room. The shift was immediate, visceral. "These are from this week," I said aloud, stepping forward with the mic. "Taken within the easement zone protected under the 1999 conservation rider." Jonah placed the printed rider on the podium, the county seal catching the light. "This is not a minor oversight," he said. "It's a violation that nullifies private conveyance under Clause 12, the room murmured, the chair adjusting her glasses, Soren's jaw tightening behind his grin. "That's an outdated filing," he started, but his voice cracked mid-word. Jonah didn't flinch. "We also have a notarized affidavit from the original grantor reserving subsurface water rights." He handed copies to the board, each page marked and indexed. "Your team was informed of potential encumbrance," he continued, yet proceeded with transfer before permit verification. On cue, Petra stood. Her voice trembled, but her words carried. "I was the seller," she said, "and I knew. I let it happen because I owed his cousin money." The hall fell silent. The only sound was the creek's footage still playing behind her. "He told me it was temporary," she continued. "He promised a buyback." Her eyes found mine briefly, and I saw both ruin and redemption in that glance. The reporters scribbled faster. Soren took a step forward, his smile dissolving. "That's slander," he snapped. Jonah raised a brow. "Would you like to hear your own voice instead?" He gestured to the projector again. The screen changed audio playback now, the recording Petra retrieved from her phone history. Soren's voice poured out of the speakers. "Just make it quick. I want everything liquid before probate questions." The audience reacted like a struck match, hissing, then roaring. The county chair's gavel hit wood repeatedly, but order was gone. The trust officer, Renee Ellis, stood near the side table, calm amid the storm. "Madam Chair," she said, stepping forward. "Per the conservation rider and verified buffer breach, the reversion clause activates effective immediately." She handed over the acceptance documents, her tone surgical. "The land is now under the jurisdiction of the Moreno Creek Trust." Cameras flashed. Soren turned pale, his mouth opening without words finding it. "You can't," he began, but the chair interrupted, voice cold. "Sir, they already have." Outside, thunder cracked again, not from the sky, but from the crowd spilling into the parking lot. Reporters swarmed Petra and Jonah. The high school students huddled near the fountain, whispering about heroes and liars. I stepped outside, the night air electric, metallic with stormlight. The creek's voice carried faintly from the speakers, still running inside our film, looping one final time. Soren stood by his car, phone pressed to his ear, shouting into the void, "Shut it down! No, we can still." He froze when he saw me. "You think this fixes anything?" he snarled. "You've just killed the whole project." I smiled, soft, tired. "Then we saved the land's heartbeat." He took a step closer, rain spotting his shirt. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "Maybe," I said, "but I'll regret silence more." The first raindrops fell heavy, rhythmic, cleansing. Jonah joined me, his expression unreadable but his eyes proud. "You did it," he said. "No," I replied, watching Petra across the lot, answering reporters' questions with trembling courage. "We did it. All of us." The trust officer approached, clipboard dry under her. "Umbrella. It's official," she said. Title reverted at 7:43 p.m. The trust owns it now. They can't touch a single inch without consent. I nodded, letting the rain mix with the sweat and relief on my face. "Let it rain," I whispered. "The ground remembers." The thunder rolled again, but this time it sounded like applause. By the time the hall emptied, night had folded fully into itself. The parking lot shimmered with puddles reflecting fluorescent light. I sat in my truck for a long while, engine off, windshield streaked with silver. Petra tapped the glass gently, climbing into the passenger seat without a word. For once, Silence felt like peace, not punishment. We drove down the hill in slow rhythm, the creek's shimmer visible between trees. "He'll come after us," she said finally. "Then we'll show him what resilience looks like," I answered. She laughed softly, a sound I hadn't heard in years. "You sound like Dad," she said. "Good," I replied. "He'd want someone to." As we passed the old bridge, headlights caught the willows we'd planted with the students, thin, green, trembling but alive. I rolled down the window and let the rain hit my face, the cold, shocking, and pure. For the first time since the betrayal, the land felt right again. The storm had broken, but the creek was rising strong, and I knew the real revenge wasn't the humiliation, nor the legal win, it was survival. The land was ours again, in spirit and in record, exactly as it had always been meant to be. And in that soaked, breathless silence after victory, I finally exhaled and whispered to the dark, "We made it, Dad. It's home again." By morning, the story had already grown legs longer than truth could chase. Every local paper carried it above the fold. Whitaker Development halted amid fraud scandal. The photo showed Soren shielding his face from rain, while Petra stood behind Jonah like a ghost learning to live again. I sat on the porch with my coffee, the headline trembling slightly in the breeze. Our phone rang nonstop, reporters, neighbors, even the mayor's office asking for statements. I ignored them all. I wanted to hear silence breathe for once, the kind that sounded like forgiveness beginning to thaw. Petra came out wrapped in Dad's old flannel, eyes swollen but clearer. "They're saying I'm brave," she said softly. "Feels wrong." I smiled without looking at her. "Bravery never feels right, only necessary." The sycamores shimmered beyond the fence line, a patchwork of scars and survival. By noon, the gossip reached boiling point. "Mrs. Lowell from the diner called to check on us," her voice syrupy with curiosity. "People say you tricked Soren on purpose," she said. "Said it was planned from the start." I laughed once, short and sharp. "They're half right," I replied. "I planned on the truth doing its job." At the feed store, conversations froze when I entered. Men nodded but didn't meet my eyes. Some saw justice. Others saw troublemakers who'd ruined progress. In small towns, truth splits people faster than rumor ever could. Tate, the old mill worker, shuffled over with his cane. "Your daddy would have liked that show last night," he said, grinning through missing teeth. That fella's face when the papers flipped looked like a possum caught drinking baptism water. I laughed for real then, the first full sound of relief since spring. "Thanks, Tate," I said. "We're just keeping the creek honest." Later that afternoon, Jonah stopped by, hair damp, tie loosened. "They're moving fast," he said, laying folders on the table. "County Ethics Committee's opening an investigation. Soren's partner withdrew his bid this morning, and the lender Marcus Whitaker is under review for predatory practices." I blinked, almost dizzy. "So it's really happening," I said. He nodded. "It's rolling. Downhill now, and we just have to stay steady." Petra hovered near the doorway, guilt and pride tangled in her eyes. Jonah gave her a long look, but no accusation. "You did good, Petra," he said simply. She flinched as though forgiveness weighed more than shame. "When he left," she whispered, "he didn't have to say that. That's why it mattered," I told her. The world outside was rearranging itself, one headline at a time, but every victory brings ghosts. Some neighbors turned cold, whispering about lost jobs, broken promises, homes that wouldn't be built. "You stopped the town's progress," someone scrawled on a note left in our mailbox. I read it once, then burned it in the sink, the paper curling into ash that smelled faintly of ink and cowardice. The next day, 2 high school kids left flowers by our gate, a quiet thank you signed for the creek. Balance, I thought, always finds its way, even if it limps. Petra started attending trust meetings with me, sitting small at first, then speaking when no one else would. She talked about debt, manipulation, and regret, her voice steady as new growth. Watching her reclaim voice was a kind of miracle one Dad would have called payment in full. The news cycle shifted quickly, as it always does. By week's end, the Whitaker office windows were dark, their sign half torn by the storm. Rumors said Soren fled to the city, chasing another project, another loophole to hide in. But the town had changed. The creek became a symbol overnight. School children painted its banks during art class, and the mayor declared a Restoration Day. Miss Alvarez's students were interviewed on local radio, explaining pH levels and buffer zones like experts twice their age. I listened from my truck, tears burning behind sunglasses. "The water belongs to everyone," one of the kids said. Simple. Perfect. The truth distilled by young tongues that hadn't yet learned compromise. Still, nights brought their hauntings. Sometimes I'd wake hearing Dad's voice, soft but distant, saying, "You did right, girl. You did right." I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling fan tracing slow circles, feeling the absence of his hand on my shoulder. Petra slept in the next room now, unable to face her empty house. We rarely spoke of forgiveness, but the silence between us no longer hurt, it healed. One evening she came downstairs carrying a small box. Inside were Dad's old pocket knife, a few coins, and his wedding ring. "You should have these," she said. "You earned them." I closed her hand over the box instead. "No," I said. "We both did." Outside, the first fireflies of summer blinked along the fence like Morse code from another world. The air smelled of earth and renewal, the sound of frogs humming beneath the steady pulse of the creek. For the first time in months, I felt the world tilt back toward balance, gentle and exact. Justice had its noise, but peace was a prof agreste, quieter song, one I was finally ready to hear. The courthouse felt different this time, no tension, no storm, just gravity. The hall smelled faintly of dust and printer toner, that quiet perfume of bureaucracy reclaiming order. Jonah led the way, papers tucked under his arm, ties straightened like a closing argument in human form. Petra walked between us, wearing one of Mom's old linen blouses, hair pinned back, eyes calm. I carried nothing but the creek jar, the same one I'd filled weeks ago. The silt had settled, water clear as glass now. Inside the courtroom, the judge's gavel struck once, a sound sharp enough to carve silence. "Case 14-08, Moreno versus Whitaker Development," the clerk announced. The words echoed like the last chord of a long, unfinished song. Jonah rose first, his tone even but edged with iron. "Your Honor," he said, "we request approval of the consent decree confirming reversion of the land to the Moreno Creek Trust with stipulated restitution for environmental restoration." He laid the motion down, each page crisp and undeniable. Across the aisle, Soren sat pale and hollow, suit wrinkled, hair unkempt, a ghost wearing ambition's remains. His lawyer whispered rapidly, but Soren stared straight ahead, maybe at me, maybe at what he'd lost. Petra didn't flinch. When the judge asked if she wished to make a statement, she stood, voice firm. "I sold what wasn't mine. I thought debt was heavier than legacy. I was wrong. I've spent every day since trying to unlearn that mistake." Her words landed soft but final, like dirt over a grave. The judge leaned forward, studying us with the weary kindness of someone who's seen too many families break and too few mend. "I commend your transparency, Miss Moreno," he said. "This agreement serves both justice and preservation." He turned to Soren, whose lips pressed into a thin white line. "Mr. Whitaker, you're hereby ordered to pay restitution in the form of environmental damages totaling $120,000 directly to the Moreno Creek Trust. Further, the court recognizes fraud in execution and invalidates your development permits." The gavel struck again 3 times this time, each hit reverberating through my chest. The sound wasn't punishment. It was release. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again, but their energy had changed. It wasn't chaos now, it was witness. Questions flew, microphones rose, and Jonah shielded us with his body like an umbrella made of patience. Petra gave one interview, just one. "This isn't revenge," she said quietly. "It's repair." The quote made the evening paper. Beneath it, a photo of us 3, me holding the jar, Jonah smiling faintly, Petra looking skyward, rain beginning to fall again as if the world approved. The caption read, "The ground remembers." The weeks that followed stitched our town into something resembling unity. The trust converted, part of the property into a community garden, open to all. Children painted murals of blue water and brown hands. Elders told stories of floods and forgiveness. Jonah joined the board as legal advisor, half joking that he wanted his retirement to smell like wet soil. Petra spent her mornings cataloging native plants with Miss Alvarez's students, documenting species returning where machines once slept. Sometimes, when she spoke to the kids, her voice cracked, but she never stopped talking. The creek ran clearer each day. fed by springs our father once mapped by hand. One afternoon, the mayor held a small ceremony at the edge of the property. She handed me a bronze plaque reading Moreno Creek Restoration Site, for those who kept memory alive. I placed it near the willow roots, where the ground was still soft and forgiving. "He'd like this," Petra whispered. I nodded, pressing my palm into the soil. "He'd like that it's quiet again," I said. We stood there until the sun dropped low, the light gilding the water like liquid promise. When I got home that night, I set the jar on the windowsill. The water inside reflected the moon, steady and full, no longer clouded. I thought about how justice, like water, doesn't rush, it seeps, patient and unstoppable. Soren's empire was fading into lawsuits and bad credit, but the creek was singing again. That was enough. I didn't need him ruined. I just needed the world to remember whose roots ran deeper. And as the night settled, soft and wide, I finally understood Dad's lesson. Vengeance fades, but restoration echoes forever. The first frost came gentle that year, sliding silver across the pasture. It found every scar, every healed wound in the soil, and made them glimmer. I woke early, before Petra or the sun, and stepped outside with my coffee steaming like forgiveness. The creek whispered faint under ice, patient as breath between prayers. A new wooden bridge crossed it, now built by the breath. Students, painted soft green, a plaque fixed to the rail, for those who listen when the land speaks. I touched it each morning, the way some people touch altars. The air smelled of pine, earth, and a peace so fragile it demanded silence. For the first time since the shouting and the sail, I didn't feel anger humming under my ribs, just gratitude that we'd all survived our own hands. By spring, the field had begun to forget the bulldozers. Wild grasses took back the ruts, willows thickened, and the frogs returned to their chorus. Jonah visited on weekends, rolling up his sleeves to help plant elderberry bushes along the buffer line. He joked that lawyers make terrible farmers but good friends. Petra laughed honest, open, the sound of weight finally leaving a body. She'd joined the trust officially now, helping oversee grants for restoration. Watching her kneel in the dirt, labeling seedlings with careful handwriting, I realized she'd built something stronger than redemption. She'd built usefulness. People started waving again when they passed her truck on the road. The gossip had turned into pride, small-town alchemy at work. One afternoon, the school brought second graders for a creek lesson. They traced the roots of the willows, watched tadpoles flicker in sunlight. I stood at the bank, telling them how water always remembers its path. "It may twist," I said, "but it never forgets where it's going." A little boy asked if the land was magic. "No," I told him. "It's memory. You just have to pay attention." The teachers smiled, jotting notes, and Petra handed out jars for the kids to collect their own water samples. Seeing her smile as the children lined up, I thought of Dad standing where we stood now, voice rough but kind. "Take care of it, girls. It's part of you." I whispered back. "We did, Dad. We finally did." The trust meetings grew into potlucks, neighbors bringing pies, teens running the projector, Jonah giving. Half speeches that turned into jokes. The community garden thrived, tomatoes bursting red beside wild mint. Old Tate even donated a hand-painted sign that read, "Justice grows here." It made people laugh, but they left it up anyway. At dusk, I'd walk the boundary fence and listen to the low hum of crickets, the world rebuilt but still honest. Petra often joined me, our silence a language now fluent in peace. She'd nudge me sometimes, grin crooked, and say, "Remember when you almost buried me alive?" I'd grin back. "Still might if you touch my coffee budget." The laughter echoed across the field, carried off by a forgiving wind. That night I sat by the window, journal open, pen resting idle. I didn't write about betrayal anymore. That story had finished telling itself. Instead, I wrote about resilience, the kind that doesn't roar but roots deeper each season. The creek outside murmured in rhythm, its song steady, unhurried. Justice had been done, but the real victory lived in moments like this. Quiet, ordinary, alive. I looked toward the old sycamores, their trunks healed over spray scars, their shadows stretching across reclaimed earth. Somewhere, the night owl called once, soft and sure, and I smiled, knowing the land had forgiven us long before we learned to forgive each other. Summer returned with the scent of rain and clean soil, the kind that seeps under your nails and reminds you you're alive. The creek ran steady again, clear enough to see minnows darting like quicksilver secrets. I stood barefoot on the bank one evening, the air soft with thunder far away. Petra sat behind me on a fallen log, humming a song our mother used to play on Sundays. The sound wove through the trees like memory refusing to fade. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" she asked quietly. I thought about it for a long time, the way you turn a stone in your hand until it tells the truth. "No," I said finally. "If it hadn't, we'd still be pretending. Love means never confronting pain." She nodded, eyes glimmering with something older than sorrow understanding. Jonah came by with papers for final signatures, though the fight had long ended. "I figured you'd want copies for your records," he said. I took them, noticing how the seals caught light like quiet trophies. "Feels strange to see it on paper," I admitted. "After all that, just ink," he smiled. "Ink's how we remember officially, but memory's how we stay honest." He tipped his hat and left before dusk swallowed the road. I lingered on the porch, watching lightning flash behind the ridge, thunder rolling in its slow applause. The house no longer felt haunted, it felt held. Even the walls seemed to breathe easier now, the ghost satisfied with how the story ended. That night, Petra made coffee strong enough to wake the ancestors, and we sat together watching the rain thread down the glass. "We'll still argue," she said suddenly, half smiling. "You'll still think you're always right." I laughed softly. "That's the bloodline curse." She reached over, squeezing my hand. "I love you, you know." I didn't answer right away. Words like that need space to echo. "I know," I said. "I love you too." Outside, the creek swelled again, its rhythm syncing with our breathing. The rain sounded almost like laughter ours, or maybe Dad's carried through time. In the morning, sunlight streamed through clean air, glinting off the plaque near the bridge. Kids chased frogs, their shouts ringing like bells. Life had folded back into itself, not as it was, but better stitched by honesty, watered by consequence. I walked the edge of the garden, brushing my fingers through mint leaves until their scent clung to my skin. The trust would continue, the land would endure, and so would we three names on a deed that once meant loss, but now meant legacy. I took one last look at the creek, whispering, "You kept your promise." A breeze answered, rippling the surface until it shimmered gold. Later that day, as I locked up the house, I glanced at the camera on the counter, battery blinking low. I pressed record one last time and spoke softly to whoever would listen. If this story reminded you that even broken roots can bloom again, like, share, and subscribe, because the earth never forgets those who listen. Then I smiled, turned off the light, and let the sound of running water carry the last word.